Well, I'm joined this morning by a senior of mine. He's a professor of many great things, and he's with the University of Media, Arts and Culture, right? UNIMAC and Communication, I should say. The University of Media, Arts and Communication, UNIMAC. He is the head for the Directorate of Research, Innovations and Development at UNIMAC. And this gentleman here, Professor Etse Sikanku, Godwin, if you would recall, somewhere in 2013 thereabouts, there was this big research about the phenomenon of Barack Hussein Obama. And he spoke a lot when it comes to the American elections, and he had become a great resource for many media houses, many people. And this was because he wrote a book which happened to be his PhD thesis on the person of Barack Hussein Obama. Well, now he has introduced another book about another African or one of African descent. And we are talking about Dr. Samira Bawumia. And we are going to be having a conversation about this interesting book here, Dr. Bawumia and the Modern Vice Presidency in Ghana. Dr. Godwin Etse Sikanku, you're welcome to the Asaase Breakfast Show.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, my daddy, your brother.
It was important that you add it. Yes. Very, very important. And Dr. Etse Sikanku is joining us to have this conversation because especially of the times that we find ourselves in. And I've been looking at your book throughout the weekend. I've been reading some parts of it, and I see how you've even organized the book. And this book is organized under 14 different chapters, all right? There is the Bawumia factor, that's the Bawumania. There's the Dr. Samira Bawumia and the evolutionary role of the vice presidency. There's the campaign politics virtuoso. There is the Her Excellency Samira Bawumia, which is chapter 4. When you go to chapter 5, there's the bridge building and unity. Go to chapter 6, there's the Supreme Court petition, a star witness illuminates the nation. Then you go to number 7, Mr. Digitalization. Chapter 8, the Bawumia vision, the nation we can be. Chapter 9, discursive leadership, engagement and impact. Chapter 10, the modern Afrocentric vice president, the Bawumia way and lessons. Chapter 11 looks at the vice presidency, a treatise. And then you go to chapter 12, where this quote is the caption for the chapter. I also have my own vision for Ghana. Correct. And then chapter 13, political communication, framing and the power of words. And finally, the journey of possibilities from Saka Saka to presidential candidate. 14 chapters of interesting headings. Let's start with why you even decided to write this book. I mean, this will be only the second political figure that you are researching and writing about. Why Dr. Bawumia?
Thank you very much, Bernard. It's Benjamin.
Yeah.
It's good to be here with you. I decided to write this as a result or a culmination of a number of things. To start with, my research is in the area that straddles politics, media, rhetoric, and communication. And so one of the areas of my research, one of the areas that my research had led me to, is the institution of the vice presidency. How did we get there? Because I'd been doing quite a lot of research on presidential communication, presidential rhetoric, campaign communication, elections, and all of that for quite a considerable span of time. I've been doing speech analysis and doing a lot of communication research. Now, across the expanse of the political communication literature, one of the things that you find is that there is a lot of attention on the presidency. And fair enough. I mean, not just in research, but even in the public domain, in media discourse, or in everyday life. The government and the presidency is such a huge influence on the outcome of the state of our nation. He does the State of the Nation address, which I've done yearly research on since 2012. We've always done each single year, together with a group of students, done some research on this on the SONA. One of them eventually, actually two, have eventually gotten published, and all of that. So the fact is that there is a huge level of attention on the presidency, and rightly so. He's been elected to do a job, right? And so you realize that he gets a lot of public attention, media attention, and research as well. But what we realized in the literature was that there was a gap. And what was this gap? Not a lot of people took the time to study the vice presidency.
Because the question is, who really cares? It's the president we vote for. It's the president who addresses us. It's the president.
Right. But I think we all do agree that the president is not an island unto himself, and he does not just come into office alone. He comes with a vice president, he comes with a team of ministers, he comes with a team of advisors, and he comes into government with his deputy ministers. They are members of parliament that support him. They are DCs. I mean, government is not just the president. I think we all know that.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, the success of the president is enormously hinged on the quality of his team and the competence of the team that he brings into his administration. Some would even argue that he provides the leadership, but his government rises and falls on the sort of people that he surrounds himself with. So to that extent, the second most important person on that ladder is the vice president, because he is the number 2 man on the national leadership. It's not even about politics or partisanship anymore. This is the second most important figure in the nation. And so the question or the issue or the point then arises that it's very important to turn our strain there. And that is what observers and researchers do, to be able, even media, turn the public attention or bring about discourses to things that are not immediately apparent, throw more light on it and make it compelling or illuminating. And also, as we progress in our democracy, try to review, revise, and enrich it by looking at various institutions which previously had not been that prominent, but you want to talk about it. So that is what, and it's not just me, but a couple of scholars.
Okay.
Who we call ourselves the vice presidential scholars across the world.
There's a group like that.
Oh, yeah.
The vice presidential scholars.
Oh, yes. There's quite a number of researchers who are into this.
Okay.
Except that it's not being done here in Ghana.
Yeah.
And so in Africa generally. And so that is why it's important that that gap was filled. And the point had been made that the VP ship, like you had said, was the assumption was that yes, it's the president who is the main guy, which is true, but the president does not work alone. In fact, the success of the president is hinged on the competency and how solid his team is.
His team is, yeah.
Yes.
Which is a thing you've said already.
Yeah. So let me land.
Yeah.
Let me land. So these scholars made the point that it was about time that we turn our eyes on the VP ship, and they began looking at the institution. And what we know historically, that not just in Ghana but across the world, is that the VP ship was something that not a lot of people paid attention to, so much so that it hadn't always occupied such a prominent role in the world, so much so that in the US they were at a point in their history where people who were even offered the VP ship refused it and said, I know there was one VP who actually said he would rather be a senator than a vice president. And the 1960s or early 90s when Jimmy Carter became president.
Yeah.
And we had Walter Mondale become VP, and he changed what the VPs did. And since then, every vice president, Republican or Democrat, always points to what Mondale and said, because of this guy, the VP-ship has become more relevant, and we would follow the Mondale model. And I think that's what Bawumia has done.
So,
for Ghana.
So you are saying that the person Bawumia has brought a certain relevance to the role of the VP beyond what it has traditionally been. And that takes me to the first two chapters of your book. The first, the Bawumia factor, the Bawumania, and the second being the Dr. Bawumia and the evolutionary role of the vice presidency. The first chapter, you talk about the person of Bawumia. I mean, looking at him as a person, his role at the Bank of Ghana, for instance, how he was even brought in by Kufuor, his role at the Bank of Ghana, the work he did there as a deputy governor, and then how he built himself into the VP role and how he's brought a certain new level of relevance to it. Talk to us about what is so special that you found in your research about his person and how that has impacted the role of VP through its evolutions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very important question. And so the point that we make is that Vice President Bawumia has played quite an important role in making the position more visible, more active, and more prominent throughout his administration. I think this is something that the broad swath of Ghanaians, irrespective of your political alignment or position, would agree with. I mean, he's been quite visible, quite prominent in his office. The traditional role of the VP, as we have known it, is one that has been quite routine, one that you operate in the shadows of the president. We've known the VP as somebody who has, read speeches, gone around to perform those ceremonial roles, and even if he was quite active, it was also in the backroom work and all of that. I mean, you look at the trajectory, and it's not just in Ghana, even in the US. You know, most of the time the president sat at the top, and the VP would just go sometimes when there's a tie in the Senate or when he has to be sent to go and commission something and all of that. But here comes Dr. Bawumia, who even before he becomes president was such a...
Before he becomes vice president?
Sorry, even before he became vice president, as vice presidential candidate, played such an enormous and significant and prominent role in the campaign. I think we're all in this country, and saw his public lectures. We saw the energy, the passion, and the dexterity with which he operated as a vice presidential candidate, introducing a political communicative style that was not really usual in our campaign communication rhetoric, which was the public lectures. So we saw somebody who used the tool of communication, specifically those public lectures, as a major political communication tool for political campaigns. Now he comes into office, and he doesn't just stop there. He moves beyond. He moves on there, not in terms of campaigning, but also as VP. He doesn't sit back. He plays a very active role as vice president for a long time. He in fact became the chief policy prognosticator and communicator for the administration, because anytime there was something big to be announced, or anytime there was a government policy initiative that needed to be explained, or an update needed to be given, or some accountability needed to be given to the people of Ghana, he would go there and give those lectures from time to time. And so he became a major force for the governance process. This was quite different, from what we've been accustomed to.
Yeah.
He didn't really sit. He was very forceful.
Because we had seen Korken Seyaka, we had seen John Evans of Tamils, we had seen Aliu Mahama, we had seen John Mahama,
yes,
we had seen Pakwesi Misa Arthur.
Thank you.
And then now Bawumia.
Yes. And so you look at all of that and you realize that, yes, of course, we pay tribute and we recognize the roles that they played, in contribution to the position. But of course, the position has evolved over time, and so it has moved from one that operated, within the shadows of the president to, a more prominent one. And I do believe that Bawumia has played a very, very important role in making it a more substantive, a more visible, and a more active role. And this is something that we need to pay credence to within our democracy. I think that it was about time that that was documented. It was about time that was recognized, because like I said, we're trying to enrich our democracy. Okay.
Yeah.
And the things that I speak to is about the increasing significance of the office.
Yeah.
And how Dr. Bawumia, through his vocal, his active, and his earnest advocacy on issues such as digitalization, has brought a lot of attention and prominence and increased attention to the position.
And I'll be coming to that element of digitalization, because you dedicate a whole chapter to that. You also talk about the Afrocentric vice president, the modern Afrocentric vice president, in other subsequent chapters. Right. But you've spoken about he being a campaign virtuoso,
yes,
which is your chapter 3, right, which you just spoke about, how he literally engaged in debates around policy and all of that. We remember some of his lectures, the very legendary one of which he gave at the Central University College, where he spoke about strongly the fact that when the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you and all of it. Became a thing, and it's still a thing that people talk about significantly. But you spent chapter 4 talking about Her Excellency Samira Bawumia.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the conversation, you have not just moved from president to vice president or even vice presidential candidate. Now you are spending some time on his spouse, Her Excellency Samira Bawumia, and her relevance and influence to the discourse of the vice presidential position, and even at its candidature stage. What is it that you find about Her Excellency Samira Bawumia that is so novel when it comes to the role of second lady and the relevance of that role when it comes to our political dispensation?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to talk about this. Samira Bawumia, she's a case study on her own. Politics has moved and has evolved over time, beyond just the presidential candidates, but including their spouses as well. In global democratic studies, we can find examples of spouses who have played quite a significant role in the campaigns and in the governance of their spouses, right? So Bill Clinton, when he was president, Hillary Clinton was first lady, and she's credited with instigating one of the most significant healthcare policy initiatives in the country. Forget about the fact of its success or not non-success, but it is always about the one who makes the effort. It is always about the one who puts themselves out there to advocate and to make a stake for something to improve the nation. It's about that contribution to national effort. Of course, the outcomes may not always be what we hope for, but the effort is what is significant or recognizable. And so Hillary decided to take up healthcare, something that she cared about, and helped her husband significantly when he was in office. We moved from there. We come to George Bush. Mm-hmm. George Bush had Barbara Bush, or is it Laura Bush?
Laura.
Yeah, and she was big on childhood education, preschool education, reading, and all of that. She came to Ghana, accompanied her husband, and propagated some of those policies. And then after that, we had Barack Obama. We had Michelle Obama, who was very good on obesity, both childhood and adult obesity, growing your own food, healthcare, and supporting the spouses of military men who had gone to war and lost their husbands, veterans, and all of veterans. There were other presidential spouses who advocated. Donald Trump, we had Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump, who was big on bullying in schools, which was a very, very important disciplinary issue, which was leading to a lot of chaos and delinquency in the American society. And then now we have Jill Biden also doing some work with veteran families. The thing about second ladies is that because of the same attention that they have within the public sphere, of course, it's not a constitutional role, but they do get that prominence. And so it is just one more opportunity to draw attention to an issue of social progress or social good or a national issue that they can become an advocate for. Because once they speak, they get that attention. So when we talk...
But that actually tends to be even the first lady. So Samira Bawumia is not only not the spouse of a president. I mean, she's the spouse of a vice president.
Which makes it even more significant what she's doing. Because yes, we do have Rebecca Akufo-Addo also doing fantastic work. I mean, you remember I wrote that article about her work as First Lady.
Yes.
The compassion that she demonstrated, her advocacy for childhood cancers, and quite a number of things when it comes to female empowerment. And she has this thing where she always encourages young prodigies who have achieved great stuff. You call them and then encourage them and supportive.
The latest being the young boy who's won the Guinness World Record, who's holding the young artist.
Yes.
Who we visited.
Yes. So I wrote a treatise on her work over there, and it's available. But what people have started noticing is that things have changed. And it's not just the first ladies, but even the second ladies as well. So they have also taken that opportunity. And that is where attention we are beginning to see that these days it's not just the first lady. And so when I do that stuff, it's not just Ghana. It's just how democracy is changing. I think we do need to recognize or pay credence to the fact that when people are elected or people find themselves in positions of privilege, they have used those positions not just for their own good or to sit in their own comfort, but I decided to include that chapter because even though there are no constitutional rules, she decided to use that opportunity to espouse the idea of what a 21st century political spouse has been. And that is that the nation has largely benefited, from her forays into issues that she has also decided to focus on. The major one being literacy, especially for young people, and bringing about the reading culture among many young people, women empowerment, health, and environment. And I remember one thing that she said, and I quote, she said that for her, when she was growing up, she realizes that it is books that helped her to become who she is currently. She said one thing. She said, books will help you to learn about the world you have not traveled to. It is your passport into the world. And that's why she launched the Samira Bawumia Literature Prize. That caught my eye. Because if we as Ghanaians are going to produce the next Ayuku Otus, the next Amata Edus, the next Chimamanda Ngozis, and we are going to, education and reading is such a great leveler. And if we are going to be able to propel ourselves and compete in the current age, reading, literacy, and education is quite significant.
Yeah.
And people talk about STEM, but it caught my eye because she turned our attention. Yes, STEM is important, but the arts can become a very important force for changing public attitudes, public minds, and the kind of values and culture that we need to promote an equitable and socially inclusive society. Then we need to reintegrate the arts as a very important strand of national development. And so when she launched that literature prize, I was like, wow, this is a forgotten area of our national life. And she launched that prize. A lot of young people competed. This was not political. There were people who just, many young teenagers and university students took part, and it brought about a certain revival in the reading and the writing culture. And I thought that, wow, this is quite significant. And it's not just that. When it comes to female empowerment, there's quite a number of things that she has done in that area. Providing training opportunities that give them employable skills in hairdressing and other areas. And, Martin Luther King said something. He said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane.
Injustice and health.
Yes, injustice in health.
Injustice in health
is the most shocking and inhumane.
Of all inequitability.
Yes. And I say this because it is frankly unimaginable and unacceptable that in this current day and age, some avoidable health predicaments, top among them maternal mortality, should continue to be a problem in this day and age. And this is something that Samira Bawumia has dedicated herself and her activities to. You know, so I mean, second lady, you could just sit down, take a back seat, and enjoy the ride. But we are beginning to see
something significantly different.
Yeah, something significantly.
And you know, it's not just she being the spouse of the vice president. Yeah. When you come to, we talk about Bawumia, and you have Bawumia in there in your chapter 4, as in fact your chapter 3, as the political campaign virtuoso. There is a Samira element there when it comes to political campaigns and her public speaking, courting of affection for the party of her spouse and all of that. I mean, in your study, how does she play into the fortunes or the successes of her spouse politically?
Yes. So there's that political part, and I'm happy you've talked about it. And just to make sure this is also a national conversation, and we've already established that, I mean, through her safe delivery project and other things that she has done, she's really, I mean, contributed in a very significant way to remove some of the, I mean, bottlenecks, you know, that have been involved in some really low-hanging preventable health conditions.
Yeah.
And so this is a national thing. But beyond that, if you come to the politics of it, I mean, it's quite admirable, the sort of things that she did within our political campaign history. I'm sure all of us remember in the run-up to the 2016 election when she gave that brilliant speech at the culmination of the campaign, and she really made a very forceful case for why her husband should be VP and Nana Akufo-Addo should be president, and she used some really great communicative skills, you know, to point out the contrast. You know, she said, "We see you, but we see this. We see you, but we see that." And then she made a very strong case. So she is fantastic on the campaign trail. She really has lived up to the bill to what a modern day 21st century quintessential political spouse should be. They serve as a great support for their husbands, but then also they become a force for advocacy on national good. But then also they also serve as surrogates. You look at the history of campaign communication, and this one, I mean, you got to be permitted to talk about strictly politics, right? They go out there on their own, making speeches, meeting various stakeholder groups, and also making the case, you know, for their on their own, aside following their husbands or their spouses. So they become a very important element of the campaign toolkit that politicians have, and that is something that we began to see a lot more these days. You remember Michelle Obama? She was so good at it that they gave her a nickname. She was called the Closer within the campaign. It was a secret nickname.
And it's serious that you talk about Michelle Obama being the Closer, because if you'd recall, 2012, the eve of the elections, where there was the DNC, I mean, the Democratic National Convention, and I mean, she came to speak just before Barack came to speak, and how that speech alone in 2012 just around the world, I mean, there are a number of people, I mean, I'm sitting here in Ghana, I don't have a vote, but just listening to her speak, she did the final closing that did not even require Barack to speak. And this matter that you talk about, that important speech in 2016 that Samira gave, was one of the most powerful to just close the polls in favor of the NPP. And of course, the results we know, the history has to tell. 2016 was one of the most remarkable wins in the fourth Republican Constitution as far as the presidential elections are concerned. And you know, so that's Samira.
Yes.
And Samira does all of this. Let's close the pre-vice president phase. Then we can go into the now vice president and now the bid to want to be president phase. The star witness of the MPP's presidential petition in 2012-2013 Dr. Bawumia. You and I were not there. How important in your book, from your research, do you see that moment in his political history?
Thank you, Benjamin. It was what I would call the coming of age, the political coming of age of Dr. Bawumia. Before that particular petition, yes, he had been within the national conversation. He had already done a presidential campaign in 2008, yeah, and which they lost. They did, and then 2012 came, and Nana Akufo-Addo still decided to stay with him. And there was a lot of ramble, a lot of talk about how he should be changed. We all know the history about when he was elected, his the fact that people saw him as a political neophyte. He had not been part. He's not been a career politician. He had not been gone through the ranks and all of that. So there was that conversation about his acceptability. Then he comes on the campaign, and they lose the elections. People want him to be changed. Then they go to 2012. President Akufo-Addo stays with him, and then they lose 2012. And then the election petition comes. Now, it was a very, very pivotal moment for our nation in terms of our growth and for our democratic growth, because we became an example for a lot of nations. In Kenya, if you realize, they cited us copiously in their own electoral petition, and it became such an example for the rest of the world. Even Nigeria had their own version and all of that, and so Ghana once again became a shining example for African growth and democracy, that we can solve our political problems and differences not through the barrel of the gun or cutlasses or walking on the streets and destroying property, but through the battle in the law courts or constitutionally mandated avenues for solving our problems.
Yeah.
And so that was a good advertisement for Ghanaian democracy. Well, guess what? Who was at the center of that particular illuminating part of our history? It was Dr. Bawumia, because he became that star witness for the petitioners. After all, they were doing the petition. And so they needed to go out there and make a case for themselves to prove what they were saying. And there were a lot of people, I mean, you know what it means to go out there into not just the local, but to the Supreme Court. Many people shied away from it.
A bench of 9 justices.
You know, and he rose up to the occasion. He said, I'm going to do this. He led the charge. He's not a lawyer, but he became a very big part of the conversation. And today, I mean, a lot of people even forget who the lead advocate was. I mean, all they remember was you and I were not there and all of that.
Yeah.
The point is that was the moment in which he endeared himself to 2 ways: to the broad swath of MPP supporters and party loyalists, because this was a man who decided to put himself out there into the hot seat to take the stabs and to make a case, but also to the nation.
Yeah.
Because it was what I call a national moment in which a lot of people admired the work that he did. You know, the confidence, the attention to detail, and his familiarity and comfortability with figures, and be able to prosecute a case. Of course, I mean, you can lose or win, but just that ability to go out there and use such a means to make a case for yourself is something that endeared him to a lot of party support, and even nationally, as well. And so you look at that, and then you realize that it was the moment that worked for him, that he gained some acceptability within both the party and the nation. People would be really, and because it was nationally televised as well, you know, everybody could see it. So I decided to dedicate that chapter because it was a very important moment for his own political career. You know, so I write that in page 64, quote, every politician needs a national moment to truly capture the minds and hearts of the people in an authentic way. Sometimes trials and disaster can test our character and bring out who we really are. For Bawumia, the Supreme Court petition was one of such moments. It was from this case that he endeared himself to some party folks and Ghanaians in general. This was his true moment of political and national certification, the moment he stamped his persona on the national psyche. Some may refer to it as part of his national coming of age in politics. And then I go on to say that this is where he developed his cognitive connection, that emotional, that cognitive, psychological connection to Ghanaians, and began to form his own base and admirers beyond his initial natural introduction to politics. In party politics, some bases come naturally through your geography, maybe from the north, through your ethnicity, maybe from your family. Your father was president and all of that, the history, the religion, and your region. But a great politician can also cultivate a wider base cognitively by appealing and connecting to the hearts and minds of people, one way or the other. For the MPP may not have won the Supreme Court case, but Bawumia had won the psychological and emotional connection to teaming party supporters and some Ghanaians.
So clearly it was very big. It was significant in there. And let's fast forward. Now he's become vice president. In your closing pages, page 193, you christen him the avatar of digitalization. An avatar of digitalization. He has become many things when it comes to the vice presidential role, and clearly you've indicated that he's changed the relevance, the narrative around the role of the vice president, to the point where, now in deciding who becomes a running mate there's a very keen attention being paid, all right, to these matters. Hitherto, the considerations for the MPP, for instance, have primarily been ethnicity. So if someone is coming from the south, they want somebody from the north, that kind of thing. But now, beyond that, there are a lot more things being considered. Digitalization, taking the charge of a number of things, economic management, many other things within the space. He's become the face, the poster boy for the government, even as vice president. How significant has this transformation been to the role by virtue of the Bawumia factor?
It really has, because it takes some conviction and some courage to be able to decipher an area of national challenge and national problem, and to say that I'm going to do this irrespective of what people say. I remember when he started with the digitalization. People were mocking it, people were questioning it, people said all sort of things, but he had the courage of his conviction to say that he's not going to be a conformist. And that is one of the values. The thing I do in the book is to unearth some of the values, some of the principles and ideologies that underpin who Dr. Bawumia is. And one of them that we look at is that he defies the status quo. He is a non-conformist. He decides that he's not going to be the traditional placeholder or figurehead or routine VP as we've known. He is going to be an activist vice president who takes charge of a particular sector, of a particular issue that he's passionate about, and to advocate on that particular issue.
And a typical example, when the issue of the e-levy had to be introduced, Ghanaians wanted to hear what the vice president has to say about it. The president had spoken. We had heard the finance minister and all other people, but we wanted to hear what the vice president had to say because of his activism within the digital space. And right now, interoperability was such a big word coming from him, and all of a sudden, right now, the Africa continent is talking about interoperability.
Yes, and you see, when I do this stuff, it is not just political; it's also for the national good. It then revives the vice presidential position into a more substantive one. That when you are given that position, yes, apart from the routine things that you can do, the question that you need to ask yourself then becomes, what national good can I do with this position that has been given to me? And when I talk about the treaties of the vice presidency, I'll take just a moment, because we're trying to look at the book and all of that. When I talk about the treaties, if you go to chapter 11, right? Yeah. Yes. What I do over there is that the vice presidency a treaty. So this is something that will be of use to people across the world. And I met one ambassador, I'm not going to mention the name, to one of the countries in Africa. He came to the book launch, bought a couple of the copies, read it, and over the weekend called me back. And he said, you know what? I'm going to send one copy of this to my president. I think every president, politician, vice president in Africa should read this book. And that is because we want to make the position. You know, when we began, you said this, but the thing is, the president. That's for vice president there. It is to make the position more productive, more meaningful, and more relevant within our democracy. And one of the things that I see is that as vice president, you are both a leader, but also a servant.
Exactly.
You are expected to be an advocate of the people. An advocate of the people, issues, policies, and programs. An advocate for solutions. An advocate for fulfillment of the basic needs of people, their liberty and prosperity. And I carve out a framework or a model for this. I say that the vice presidency should, among things, be a position of advocacy, service, and a force for national good. Advocacy not just for the government, but for the people. The vice president has the unique opportunity to be the reality check for the president and a reflective pulse of the people. So you are the citizens' advocate. The vice president, you see, this position sits below the president, right? But the argument that I'm making is that this is a position that can be effectively used not just for the symbolism or the tradition of it, but it can really become a transformative force. Let's talk about how we can make it more useful. And so the thing is that the vice president, sitting right below the president, should be an instrument of social justice, social cohesion, and social prominence and social progress. That position can become the single most significant reform-oriented executive framework, as it serves as a link between the powerful authority of the president and the collective will of the people. So when you get elected, one of the questions that you got to ask yourself is, what consequential change can I bring to the nation through such a powerful position? And on page 112, I write that according to Bawumia, he answered that question. What is that consequential change? He seeks to bring realistic change to the lives of Ghanaians by leveraging on technology to bring about development and prosperity to all. Digitalization is something that works in agriculture, it works in healthcare, it works in justice delivery, it works in education. This is a game changer.
Transport and logistics.
The
ports and all that.
If we want to catch up with the advanced, the developed in the modern world, digitalization is going to play a very critical role in moving us from a society of backwardness into a modern society.
And so, I mean, to the point where now the Ministry of Communication is rechristened the Ministry for Communication and Digitalization. I mean, clearly there's a focus there, and this has become his brainchild and something he's driven very significantly. Wrapping up the conversation, because we don't have so much time, you talk about him building bridges, unity, I mean, collectiveness, and we have seen in a very uncommon fashion Dr. Bawumia engage in a lot of religious ecumenism, you know, engaging with, he being Muslim himself, connecting so much with the Christian fraternity, the traditional leadership, drawing his own experiences of having grown up in a bi-religious family, having Christians in there, Muslims in there, his connection to traditional leadership and all of that, and how he has the number of churches Bawumia has visited in this country just this year, you know. I mean, there's the political interest that is clearly in there, but being able to bring oneself to that point, the national cohesion, his drive as leader, and he eventually also saying, I have my own vision. In wrapping up the conversation, that bridge that he brings, and also the espousal of his own vision, wanting to become president, in your research, your reading of him, do you see him as the kind of bond that is, if given that opportunity, is going to become too important for us given the next level that we want to go to as a country?
Extremely important. You know, the president goes out there, he campaigns, he goes out there, he talks for his administration and all of that. But the vice presidency can become a force for national unity. because he's sitting right there below the president, and the president goes and does all his faces on the campaign posters, his faces on the ballot box. He has his political legacy to protect and all of that. Of course, the vice president supporting him, but the vice president sitting at the position that they are can then use that position to become an instrument for national unity and for national good. And once you get elected as president, it is as vice president, or president and vice president, it's no more about the politics. It becomes about the nation. And yes, you can talk about the optics, you can talk about the polemics, you can talk about the ambition of it. But underneath all of that, even just the symbolism of it, of reaching out, because you can have another candidate from another faith who can become an ideologue, and we've seen it in other countries. So even just that symbolism of it, that picture, that optics of him with Father Campbell, visiting people with leprosy, touching them, the humaneness of it, the empathy of it, that ability that Ghana as a nation, Christians and Muslims can work together to propagate the national force, to serve the needs of the needy, and to bring about national unity and national cohesion. And when there is peace, that is when we can think together and work together to be able to move this nation. Is something that we should not ever lose sight of, because that has become the instigator for political violence and trouble in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so it is very important that, yes, whilst we have our political debates and squabbles, we really need to point this out. And Father Campbell was at the book launch.
Yeah.
And you'll be shocked. He took time, took the microphone, and spoke from his heart. He said Dr. Bawumia is one of the most empathetic human beings he's ever met. People come to the leprosy place, they don't even want to touch them, they don't want to go near. He goes, he touches them, he holds hands with them, he's speaking. So I just wanted that as Ghanaians, we don't lose some of these things that we have.
Sight of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if our nation is going to move forward, it's not just about the economics and the statistics, but it's also about the values that we have as a nation, whether we are ready to work together. Harmony, traditionalism. We culturally are people who believe in harmony,
yeah,
who believe in unity. We believe in working together as one people.
And that's why the arts is important, because that's where the value system gets to be built significantly.
Thank you.
Dr. Godwin Etse Sikanku, great work. I mean, I've read this book. How does one get a copy?
Yes, so for now,
yeah,
at Legon Bookshop.
Legon Bookshop for now.
And also Allied Kingdom Bookshops.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll get the Amazon and the Shell
okay,
shops too.
Okay, all right. Dr. Bawumia and the Modern Vice Presidency in Ghana, authored by Dr. Godwin Etse Sikanku. Grab a copy. That's how we wrap up our show this morning. There's a lot more to be read in this 14-chapter book, authored by a very brilliant Odadie. And he's done this, I mean, to add further to our political dispensation. And that's how we are going to be wrapping up the show. My name is Benjamin Ofeado. And just before we go, I mean, so there's, I see. I'm sorry. I'm reducing people's posts. Please. He's Professor Godwin Etse Sikanku. Forgive me, I don't have even a PhD. Professor Godwin Etse Sikanku, he's the author and he's been my guest this entire time. My name is Benjamin Ofeado. I've been your host this morning, and thank you for the pleasure of your company. Coming up is Asaase Cafe across the country, before which we are going to be taking the news update. Do have yourselves a good day.